Dino Martins, I never thought I would love a book about maggots so much that I couldn't stop reading it. This book is a thing of beauty. It's called Hidden Creatures. And then it has this clever, funny subtitle, Luscious Leeches, Bashful Botflies, and the Wondrous History Shaping World of Parasites. And I thought, oh, okay, this is a naturalist book, but it is so much more than that. And then I thought, oh, it's published by Knopf. Those of us that know the publishing world know that there's the two prestigious publishers, even with the shrinking publishing world, are Ferris Strauss Giroux and Alfred A. Knopf. So I thought, this is more than a naturalist book. There's something I'm going to discover in this book. And boy, did I. First of all, the life you've led and continue to lead, apparently, bravely going into extreme places full of parasites is just riveting. It's as if you're still that little boy that we all were, those of us that are girls were little girls, playing in puddles, looking at things that grow there. And as a teacher, you bring that wonder to your students, PhD kind of students, not children students, and you still have that yourself. How do you retain that after a lifetime of being around such grossness that you just find fabulously interesting?
I think you've captured it in a way. It's this sense of wonder that I find is just such a part of the world around us, if we will allow it to, if we allow ourselves to see it, and if we will allow ourselves to engage with it. And I'm very much inspired by my students of all ages. I have students who are much, much younger than me. I have students who are older than me, and that's wonderful. And I find with all of them that the minute there's this moment where I see the light go on in their eyes, and we might be looking at a tick or a mosquito or a grass or a dog or anything, and suddenly that spark is lit, and it's lit for life. Once you have it, you will never let go of it. And actually, as you noted, everyone has this. Every little
Yes.
girl and little boy has this spark of imagination, of creativity. In fact, for me, being human is being able to see the details and experience the world with all of our senses and relish that, because it provides a deep stimulus to our mind, to our body, and allows us to also recognize that, look, we're just one of these magnificent species on this planet, and
Yes.
including half of all living things, which are parasites.
Yes, half of them. But you also are, because you're intellectually curious, you're also a historian. So you look back in time at great scientists who stumbled upon or searched ardently to find the answers to disease vectors, etc., parasites, but you tell their stories along with your own. So before we talk about them, I'm in India, in China, places I'm like, really? 2 Nobel Prizes for work on mosquito-borne diseases? Who knew? But one admires these people. But before we do that, can you talk a little bit about your own life? Because you've lived in 2 lives, and living in Africa is, to me, very exotic. And you make it so normal, just like living in England would be. So are there lots of people that still live in 2 places, one of them being Africa, and you go back and forth carrying disease with you happily back and forth?
So I've had probably one of the most unusual and privileged childhoods. Despite my early life facing quite a few challenges, my biological family fell apart. But in a way, one of the blessings in my life, as I write in the book, was having 3 mothers.
Yes, yes.
And this was my biological mother, Philomena, Nani, who's an amazing artist who became one of my mothers, and then Sarah Ellen, who is also an incredible person who's actually an American. And so the 3 mothers together raised me and gave me this incredible kind of support and love, and always said, follow your heart, follow your dreams, do what you really believe in, never give up, never accept no for an answer. If something doesn't work one way, keep at it if you believe in it and you really want it to happen. So I grew up in Kenya, have spent most of my life in Kenya. I am Kenyan. I'm still primarily based here, but through the incredible opportunity of going to university, which at first wasn't going to happen. So I'd
That's
actually
right.
dropped out. I dropped out of high school and I was going to go live in the bush and count animals. In fact, I was doing that. I was volunteering and helping projects count elephants and other animals. And I was convinced to go back to school and finish. I was also given an ultimatum by my parents and told you either go back to school or else. But I was convinced to go back to school, and I did finish with the understanding that if I then went to university, I would have other opportunities. I then again said, no, I'm going back into the bush and I'm going to live with my friends, the animals, and I have no interest in going to university. But I was then told there's this opportunity to go to the Amazon rainforest.
Right.
And that was remarkable. So I immediately jumped at it. And I had to go off at that time. In going from Kenya to an American university was quite a big deal. I had to go sit for the SATs, which were a different exam from what we had done in Kenya. And so I went off to this one American academy in a different part of Kenya and sat for the SATs. And again, thanks to some miracle, I did well in them. I got a scholarship. And then the rest is history. I went to Indiana. And that in itself was an interesting choice because I was actually accepted and offered places at Harvard, at Princeton, at Stanford, at all these different very well-known
Prestigious.
universities.
Yes.
And my parents, my foster parents, said, look, come to Indiana because one, they were going to be there. Two is that they felt me coming from rural Kenya, from a
Yes.
very kind of both difficult but also insular upbringing, being plunged directly into a high pressure environment would not have been the best thing. And actually, many people will say Indiana, and actually, I had the wonderful time. I will never forget my first day that I arrived in Indiana, and it was late summer. It was hot and humid, and all the insects were out. And the neighbors came over and invited me and took me out. And I met their dogs, and they had horses, and we went riding and kayaking. And that's the thing about the Midwest, is just
That's
the
right.
incredible warmth. And in
Yes.
so many ways, it was very similar to the community I'd come from in Western Kenya,
Oh,
which was
right.
rural, it was agricultural. People loved animals. Animals were very much part of everyday life. And I had the most excellent education at Indiana University. I did get to go to the Amazon. One of my advisors went on to win a Nobel Prize, Eleanor
Wow.
Oscar. So that was just transformative. I went back to Kenya, started working, worked with Dr. Leakey and others, did a lot in wildlife and natural history. And then I got to a point where there were all these battles we were fighting, and I felt like I was being so crushed. And again, my parents stepped in and said to me, Dino, if you get a PhD, you can sit at the table and you can be the
Right.
one helping to make decisions rather than being the one being told what to do. And so off I went and I applied to different programs and I ended up at Harvard. I'd actually almost accepted the offer from Princeton. While at Princeton, someone recommended I go over to Harvard, which I did. And I met with who became my advisor, Naomi Pierce, who was just amazing. I was whisked around this amazing museum. I met all these other absolutely eccentric, wonderful naturalists. Ernst Mayr was still alive and still coming in. He was 99, I think, at the time.
Wow.
And E.O. Wilson was there. And I was just like, wow, I found a place where I can really connect both intellectually, but also spiritually. And I
Yes.
had that incredible privilege. Again, got a scholarship fully funded, did my PhD, and then came back to Kenya and just carried on with it. And now I'm very lucky going back and forth. The world is a lot more challenging than it was. It
Yes.
feels a lot more fraught. And yet, every time I go into the field with students, I just came back from a field course. Every time I see that wonder, I see that light, and I just think, gosh, the world has much to celebrate, and a big part of that is discovery and learning. And that is so deeply part of being human. I think we'll never lose it. We're always good. No AI, no algorithm, no social media, nothing can replace that sense of wonder of being a physical being in nature.
And that's what comes across in the book. And that's why I asked you to explain that, because your personality, your character, your joy, your intellectual nimbleness, and yet humility come through in the book. So you, in a minute, you're suddenly talking about Egyptian mummies and how people used to go there and fool around in the graves before someone took better care of them. And the fact that these parasites have been here quite a while. And in the way that the world is such a crushing mess, the bugs are still here and the bugs are carrying on. And you show us their life's work and how complex it is and how wondrous and how impressive. And we're just like, we just get up and have a cup of coffee and like go in the woods. But in the woods, there's this teeming activity that you describe. You start the book early on with the maggots. And I have to say that of all the gross things, I have friends who are horrified by ticks. Other people are horrified by spiders, which aren't parasites. But maggots to me, I once had a worm in my salad, which wasn't a maggot. It was probably a caterpillar that was going to become something beautiful. And I burst out crying as a teenager. And nothing bothers me. I was the little girl poking in the stick in the woods. And once there was a maggot in a wheel of cheese I bought from the side of the road with my sister when she was looking at Romanesque churches in France. And I'd already eaten several bites of this cheese. And when I saw the half maggot, which is, of course, why you never want to see half a worm in an apple, I screamed and threw it out the window of the car. So the idea that you were scooping huge, massive handfuls of maggots upon maggots within maggots from the guts of a decaying elephant carcass was like, oh, baby. And you said it stank pretty bad, and you were a bit nauseous, but you were riveted. The fact that there's maggots that feed on maggots, what about that? Were you the first one to know that, or was that already well known?
That had been observed, but not very thoroughly documented. So yes, no, that's a very important point, actually. And two things you've mentioned. One is the biology, the natural history. There's been amazing work done. We still have so much to learn because the life cycles of some of these organisms are so complex and so devious and so
Yes.
wonderfully evolved
Yes.
that it's almost like a science fiction story when you really try and track them through every stage. But something I did really want to say, which you'd mentioned that is so important, is the history, because you cannot separate human history from natural history. And
Right.
in this case, I was able to add this history of science layer to the book. It actually evolved as I was writing the book. Initially, I was going to mention these people, but do it in a very kind of general sense and talk a little bit more about the biology and less about the people. But then something happened. Off I went to the American Museum of Natural History library,
Ah.
and two of the librarians there were so remarkable. Then I went to the Linnean Society, and the librarians there were just outstanding. And I went off to the Wellcome Trust, and the librarians and the archivists were just brilliant. And I got to interact with the librarians and the archivists at all these places who were so passionate and so helpful. And because through this history of science, a lot of the scientists wrote notebooks and kept diaries and
Oh.
kept journals or wrote books about what they did and all of their early papers. And in those days, there was less of a distinction between writing science and being completely abstract and neutral and rigorous and writing about your experiences in life. And so reading this, I realized, wow, I've got to tell the story of some of these people because
Yes.
they were totally eccentric, incredibly brilliant. And quite frankly, if they hadn't made the breakthroughs they made, the world we live in today would be very different. We would not
Yes.
have all the incredible good health and well-being and ability to fight disease that we have, whether for ourselves or our pets and our families and everyone.
That's absolutely right. And there are times that your book reminded me of a book that is, I think, shines on everyone's shelf. Who cares? The Emperor of All Maladies, an extraordinary book about the history of cancer, as if it were a biography of cancer. But your book is a biography, a description, an immersion into parasites across the planet, not just what they do and how they do it, but how people before you studied them and how they came up with these incredible realizations. Now, there was one in China where Manson studied his gardener who had
Yes.
elephantiasis. And you tell the story of how he used Hinlo, his gardener, a man before Dino Martins wrote about him, would never be celebrated historically. This man had elephantiasis, a horrible disease. We've all seen those really scary pictures of people's limbs and scrotum, and they're just enlarged.
It is pretty horrendous.
It's
Yes.
pretty horrendous. And here they were, it was all came from mosquitoes. And Hinlo let himself be bitten multiple times. And then Manson took his blood and looked at it. And then there was a fight between Manson and another scientist who found it first. And then a mosquito, he didn't get the Nobel, but at least he got a mosquito named after him. You tell these
He
stories
did.
as if they're this boy's life. It's great. We have a sense of a world teeming with smart and interesting, as you said, quirky, eccentric people. And it takes a like minded one, being you, to bring both rigorous academics, but also joyful passion. And then in India, you had the man who was the Colonial Indian Medical Service MD. And you think, wow, those days in India must have been interesting. And he had a patient, Hussein Khan, who you now have made gently famous, who also allowed himself to be used. And you used yourself. In your book, you use yourself.
Yes, I do. And one important thing, and I try to do this carefully, because when you look at the history of the discovery, it often goes hand in hand with colonialism and empire,
Yes.
with a lot of what is questionable today. You think about even in Germany, where Dr. Kuchenmeister discovers the tapeworm life cycle.
Yes.
When I was reading his notebooks, which were amazing to find, but first of all, not only was he called Dr. Kuchenmeister, which is the most remarkable name, but the fact that he's going and experimenting on prisoners who are about to
Yes.
be executed without their knowledge. And yes, it is, if we judge it in today's terms, it's completely unethical. But if he didn't make that breakthrough when he did, so much of the rest of science and discovery would not have happened, would have been set back. So part of what I'm trying to do in the book is to say, look, the world we live in, when we look at it in all of its beauty and its bizarre detail, it's important to take all of that in.
Yes.
And today in particular, as a world becomes more divided and more polarized, I think one of the things I hope people will get out of the book is that, look, right now we have more in common as human beings and in the challenges we face on the planet than we do have as differences. And I think for me, it's a subtle message, but I hope it gets through into the readers of the book.
It's subtle, but I think for me, the other thing it does is take you out of what is happening day to day and take you into jungles. We get to go to jungles with you. It's an amazing ride. I would love to ask you to read a couple of passages so that when people say, I would buy Hidden Creatures, but is it really going to be gross? It's good gross. It's fascinating gross, but the writing is magical. I'm sure this is why Knopf is your publisher. This is a work of literary beauty. If it weren't about things that kind of make us squeamish, it would just be a beautiful rendering of the natural world. Would you read just the beginning of the chapter, Magnificent Mosquitoes and Perfect Plasmodia, just to give people a
Okay,
sense of your writerliness?
thank you. Here we go. A raucous braying reverberates. Sorry, I'll start again. A raucous braying reverberates through the air, betraying the presence of a family of prehistoric feathered creatures. Dark shadows move above, shaking the branches. a gathering of black and white casqued hornbills. A squishy plop plop of half-eaten fruit rains down softly onto the forest floor. Tut tut, such wasteful birds. A swooshing of wings rakes through the damp air, announcing the arrival of yet more hornbills, accompanied by a belligerent honking and shuffling among the branches of the fruiting fig tree. The roots of the fig are massive, worn, and wrapped around the carcass of another tree. Peering up along the length of the trunk, I see a coating of ferns, mosses, and other epiphytes glued to one of the flanks of the tree. This is the side that, slightly leaning, receives regular dousing with rain, allowing these plants to thrive. The fallen fruit, fermenting on the leaf litter, attracts many insects. Lines of hunched-backed harvester ants, russet stingless bees with bell-bottom hind legs, and various butterflies. A flitting shadow, dark, with banded wings and flashes of violet, sweeps past me. It flies through the dappled light, then turns and flashes past again, settling on a squashed fig near my feet. I stand still and admire the soft, shifting colors on its outspread wings as it unfurls its proboscis and starts to imbibe the rotting juices. A Kakamega forester, one of the special butterflies here in the Kakamega forest in Western Kenya. But I can't waste time gazing at butterflies.
No. And then you go on after this bucolic idea of, oh my God, everything gets eaten by somebody and ferments and somebody else benefits from it, to talk about these mosquitoes. And I'll never again be swat at a mosquito. I will totally swat at mosquitoes. I'm not a Jane. I will swat at them. But I will never again see them approaching me and not think of your description of after you've let one feed on you and you're watching it carefully and describing it, how she goes belly up and we look at her swollen belly full of your blood. It's like you think everything is wondrous and it makes us realize it too. And it isn't just a stinger that goes into our skin. You describe she has this little slicing knife and she slices a hole and then she puts, oh my God, it's riveting. And you have all your students standing around being bitten by mosquitoes and looking at them in wonder. It's like we all drink the Dino Martins Kool-Aid, and it's absolutely fantastic. It's delightful. Often in a worrisome way, because you got a very serious kind of malaria and nearly fell off your horse, or did, and then you're in the hospital, and luckily, as you said, science had advanced and they could find out, A, that it was malaria, which wouldn't have shown up 2 weeks before, but that it was actually quite a deadly kind. And then you talk about how many medicines have come from barks of trees and plants. And there's just so much to learn in this book. We're all too ignorant of the world around us. We just get out our bug spray instead of realizing what a fantastic journey. Heartworms. You talk about heartworms and dogs. And you go into the jungle with your dogs. It reminds me of my favorite book, which I mentioned to another naturalist recently who didn't know it. You totally are going to know A Story Like the Wind. Of course you know it. You were a young boy in the bush. There's a young boy going in the bush with his Rhodesian Ridgeback. But you go in with your dogs.
Yes, Jack Russell Terriers.
and a large one. There's a large one sitting in that chair behind you.
Well, that's actually, Dudu is a Jack Russell, but she's quite a large one. Dudu, do you want to come over?
My God, she's gigantic. She says, I'm not getting up. I'm resting, Dad.
We've had a long walk, so.
So wonderful that you all get to have that life together. And you talk at one point about, and I had to go back and find your adjective, our hairier cousins, the gorillas and chimpanzees, and how we've given them disease and they can give it back to us. And this whole zoonotic thing. And we've run out of time, Dino. Your book is a work of art, a work of joy and wonder. And I'm just so very grateful that it came to me. Hidden Creatures, Luscious Leeches, Bashful Botflies, and the wondrous history-shaping world of parasites. I hope that this wins you all the awards that it should. Every award. I guess you can't get a Nobel Prize for a book, but you can get a Pulitzer. I'll be voting if they wanted to know what my vote was. I think you're incredible, and keep on keeping on. Never change. You're wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tracy.